Let's say Congress looks into it. What should the consequences for something like this be? It's not just telling the president what he likes to hear. That information then is what gets spread, told to the American people. We're raised to believe, to trust our government.
Well, I think this allegation, and you used the appropriate word, has begun to undermine the series of events during this administration, has begun to undermine the trust of the American public in government and government officials. I mean, I think the most corrosive allegation the president made was the fact that he would be reelected, and the only way he would not be reelected would be a fraud within the vote on November 3rd. And his allegations about abuses of the absentee ballot is a prime example of that slow erosion of trust. I find this one even more disturbing to me, simply because it undermines and denigrates the most fundamental and basic tool of self-government, and that's the election process. So again, it's not the first time there's been an allegation of inappropriate behavior and fraud and misstatement. And unfortunately, writ large, Republicans or Democrats, that does erode the general public's trust in the federal government and the officials who are basically, they're also obliged to speak truth to them. Speak truth about the election, speak truth about the COVID pandemic. It is, again, it's a very troubling environment within which we live and within which you report these days. And nothing more troubling in my mind than a president saying, well, the only way I'll lose is that there's fraud with these absentee ballots, and there's no history, no record in 40 years, even confirmed by conservative Republican attorneys who have been involved in election law for 40 years. There's that statement in of itself is a fraud that obviously undermines the legitimacy of the election process. But
then, sir, what do we do about that? We are 54 days out from the election, and President Trump didn't say it in the past. He continues over and over to sow doubt in mail-in voting. Within this hour, he said it is a total fraud in the making. And you're saying it is clearly not a total fraud. But how do you feel about the position that we're in? This is the president telling the 85 million people that follow him on Twitter and all the media outlets that follow.
It's beyond aggravating. It angers me. I mean, the fact of the matter is the president of the United States, using his bully pulpit, in the face of historical evidence to the contrary, in the face of the election officials, Republicans and Democrats, who frankly are guardians of democracy at the local level, that'll push against this. I simply say to you and everybody watching and everybody in the world of journalism and political leaders writ large, it is an absurd, it is a fraud, it is a falsehood, it is a lie. There is absolutely nothing in the history of elections that says there really a massive fraud that he's talking about. And I would say to the president, look to your own look to the Heritage Foundation, a conservative group that did a data analysis of elections for the past 40 years, and will tell you it is an imperfect system, but out of nearly several hundred million votes, a couple of hundred votes and allegations led to criminal prosecution. It's undermining, again, the earlier question was about trust. And when the president denigrates the most basic, the most fundamental process in the election, in the democracy of elections, and when I'm astonished, and as a lifelong Republican, astonished, there's absolute silence within the Republican Party writ large to push back on this. That's why Vote Safe, Jennifer Granholm, the Democrat former governor of Michigan, and yours truly said there are two things we need to do: safe and secure in-person balloting and safe and secure absentee balloting. And in key states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, critical to this election, we're encouraging those election officials and the legislators, move the process up. Let's start processing these ballots before Election Day. The president has basically said, if there's a delay, it's fraudulent. That means there's a miscount or an unlawful count or an appropriate count. There will be a delay, Mr. President. There will be a delay. It's because there's an unprecedented number of Americans who choose not to go to the polls. Mr. President, it's called COVID-19. You need to provide safe and secure options. So don't undermine the trust of Americans, Mr. President. You have the responsibility, if you believe there's fraud, to work with state and local officials to make sure that none will occur. But frankly, you're also, and I'm going to, the men and women at the local level, I'm sorry, Stephen, I'm a little aggravated about this. I know with them, I worked with them. They're Republicans and Democrats. They're guardians of our democracy. They take their responsibility very seriously. They verify those signatures. If there's any doubt, there's other procedures. They may want to make sure that every vote's counted, but don't. How dare you say that the only way you can lose an election is if there's fraud, if it's rigged? Mr. President, that is truly and simply un-American and unworthy of an incumbent president of the United States to make such a horrible statement.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.